The air in the mahogany-panelled boardroom wasn't just cold, it was venomous. Ashton Langford sat at the head of the table, his hand resting possessively on the thigh of a woman young enough to be his daughter. A smirk plastered on his face as he waited to claim his late father's empire. He thought he had erased his past, buried his secrets, and outsmarted everyone in the room. But he didn't count on the quiet, grey-haired lawyer at the other end of the table, holding a single, yellowed document that would not only strip Ashton of his millions, but send him to prison. This is the story of greed, betrayal, and the ultimate courtroom ambush. The rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Langford Holdings headquarters in downtown Seattle. It was a fitting backdrop for the reading of Tobias Langford's will. Tobias, a man who had built a shipping empire from a single fishing boat into a global logistics titan, had died 3 weeks ago of a sudden massive heart attack. He left behind a fortune estimated at $400 million, a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, and a family shark tank that was about to boil over. At the center of the room sat Ashton Langford, Tobias's only son. Ashton was 55, tanned to the color of mahogany from a month in St. Tropez, and dressed in a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than most people's annual rent. Next to him sat Chloe, a 24-year-old lifestyle influencer, with vacant blue eyes and a diamond on her finger the size of a quail egg. She was Ashton's fiancée, though the ink on his divorce papers from his third wife was barely dry. She was scrolling through her phone, visibly bored by the somber atmosphere. Ashton drummed his manicured fingers on the polished oak table. "Can we get on with this? Jacobs," he snapped at the family attorney. "Henry Jacobs. I have a flight to Aspen at 6. The jet is already fueled." Henry Jacobs adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He was a man of 70, slight and unassuming, wearing a suit that looked like it was purchased in the late 90s. He had served Tobias for 40 years. He was a man of few words, meticulous, and currently the keeper of secrets that could burn this room to the ground. He looked up from his files, his expression unreadable. "We are waiting for one more beneficiary, Ashton." "One more?" Ashton laughed, a harsh, barking sound that grated on the ears. "Who?" "The gardener dad's favorite spaniel. I'm the only heir." "Henry. My sister died 10 years ago. It's just me. Stop wasting my time with these formalities." "Actually," a soft voice came from the doorway, "he's waiting for me." Ashton spun his leather executive chair around. Standing there, shaking a wet, cheap umbrella onto the plush carpet, was a woman who looked nothing like the glossy, polished elites usually found in this boardroom. She wore a worn beige trench coat, sensible shoes that had seen better days, and carried a canvas tote bag. Her hair was greying, pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. She looked like a librarian who had taken a wrong turn. "Who the hell are you?" Ashton demanded, standing up. Security. "How did she get past the lobby?" "Sit down, Ashton," Henry said, his voice surprisingly firm, cutting through Ashton's bluster. "This is Margaret. She is highly relevant to these proceedings." "Relevant?" "She looks like she's here to clean the floors." Chloe giggled, covering her mouth with a hand adorned with freshly done acrylics. "Ashton? Tell them to give her a 20 and send her away." Margaret didn't flinch. She walked to the empty chair opposite Ashton, sat down, and placed her tote bag on the table with a heavy thud. She looked Ashton dead in the eye. Her face was lined with years of hard work, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and cold as ice. "Hello, Ashton. It's been a long time. 30 years, to be exact." Ashton squinted. There was something vaguely familiar about the set of her jaw, the way she held her chin. A memory tickled the back of his mind, a hazy recollection of a summer in Ohio, a roadside diner, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap perfume, the reckless abandon of youth. But he shoved it down. That life was dead. He was Ashton Langford now. "I've never seen you before in my life," he sneered. "Let us proceed," Henry said, opening the leather-bound folio in front of him. The last will and testament of Tobias Langford. The tension in the room thickened. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a distant warning siren. Ashton leaned back, arm draped possessively over Chloe's chair, radiating arrogance. "Go on then. Read the part where I get everything. Skip the charitable nonsense." "I'm Tobias Langford," Henry read, his voice steady. "Being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all former wills and codicils." He droned on through the standard legalese, listing minor bequests to charities, the local hospital, the Maritime Museum, the Fund for Retired Sailors. Ashton checked his gold Rolex, tapping his foot. "To my son, Ashton," Henry continued. Ashton straightened up, smoothing his tie. "Here we go. I leave the sum of $1. The silence that followed was absolute. The rain against the glass seemed to stop. Chloe stopped chewing her gum. "Excuse me," Ashton whispered, his face draining of color. "Did you say?" $1. $1, Henry confirmed, not looking up. "For the cab ride home, I suggest you don't take the toll bridge." "This is a joke." Ashton stood up, knocking his heavy chair over with a crash. "This is insane." The old man was senile. "I'll contest this. I'll bury you in litigation for decades. Jacobs, you manipulated him." "There is more," Henry said calmly. "The entirety of my estate, including my controlling shares in Langford Holdings, my properties in New York, London, and Aspen, and all my liquid assets, I leave to my lawful daughter-in-law." Ashton froze. "Daughter-in-law, I'm not married. I divorced Cynthia last year, and Brenda before that. I am a single man." Henry looked over his spectacles at Margaret. "My lawful daughter-in-law, Margaret Ann Miller Langford, whom my son Ashton married in Las Vegas on June 14th, 1994, and never legally divorced," Chloe gasped, pulling her hand away from Ashton's arm as if he were radioactive. "You're married." Ashton's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That was a drunken mistake. We were 20. We annulled that. It was a weekend thing." "Did you?" Margaret spoke for the first time since sitting down. She reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a photocopy of a marriage license. It was yellowed with age, but clearly legible. "Because according to the records in Clark County, Nevada, we are very much still married. You left the motel room while I was sleeping. Ashton, you left $100 on the nightstand and a fake name. But you used your real ID for the license. I found you." Ashton looked at the paper, then at Henry, then at Margaret. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping terror. The mistake he had made 3 decades ago, the waitress he'd married on a dare during a drug-fueled weekend bender and abandoned 3 days later, had just come back to haunt him. You never filed for divorce," Ashton stammered. "Why would I?" Margaret said smoothly. "I went back to my life. I didn't know you were this Ashton Langford until 5 years ago. And by then, well, I decided to wait. Your father found me. Ashton, Tobias found me 3 years ago. We've become quite close friends. He told me everything about how you treated him, how you stole from the company accounts, how you waited for him to die. You were talking to him. Ashton's face went purple. You poisoned him against me. He knew who you were. Ashton, Henry interjected. He knew you were already planning to sell the company for parts to a private equity firm the moment he was in the ground. He wanted to protect his legacy, and since you never signed a prenup with Margaret, half of what you made in the last 30 years is legally hers under community property laws, and all of what your father left is hers by will. Ashton looked at Chloe, who was already texting furiously, likely calling an Uber. He looked at the boardroom doors. He was trapped, but Ashton wasn't done. He was a Langford. He didn't lose. He narrowed his eyes, a vicious glint returning to them. You think you can waltz in here with a piece of paper and take my birthright? You have no idea who you're dealing with. That marriage is void. I'll prove abandonment. I'll prove fraud. I have lawyers who cost more than your entire life's earnings. Margaret smiled, a small, sad smile that was more terrifying than a scream. Oh, Ashton, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. That's why I didn't come alone. She gestured to the door. It opened again, and 2 men walked in. One was a private investigator named Frank Russo, a burly man with a broken nose. The other man wore a windbreaker with 3 yellow letters on the back, FBI. Ashton Langford, the agent said. We'd like to have a word with you about bigamy and wire fraud involving the shell company Blue Horizon in the Cayman Islands. Ashton slumped back against the mahogany table, his world fracturing. But as he looked at Margaret, he didn't just see an enemy. He saw a variable he hadn't accounted for. She doesn't know about the safety deposit box in Zurich. He thought, she doesn't know about the second ledger. If he could just talk his way out of the arrest, he could still win. He just needed to buy time. Henry, Ashton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. I want a recess. Now. There is no recess. Ashton, Henry said, closing the file. But there is part 2 of the will. Ashton looked up. Part 2. Yes, Henry said. The clause regarding the morality clause. The room went silent again. Ashton felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing: the war had just begun, and he was already losing. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from tension to a chaotic, suffocating dread. The FBI agent, Agent Miller, no relation to Margaret, though the irony was not lost on Ashton, stood with his hand hovering near his handcuffs. But Henry Jacobs held up a hand, his palm facing the agent's, signaling for a moment of pause. The morality clause, Henry repeated, his voice cutting through the noise of Chloe sobbing into her designer handbag. Ashton, cornered like a rat in a trap of his own making, snarled, What morality? My father was a pirate in a suit. Don't preach to me about morality. Henry. This isn't about ethics. Ashton, Henry said, sliding a sealed black envelope across the table. It stopped inches from Ashton's trembling hand. It's about leverage. Tobias knew that if you lost the money, you would fight. You would sue Margaret. You would drag the Langford name through the mud for decades just to get a penny. So, he added this. Ashton stared at the black envelope. What's inside? Evidence, Margaret said softly. Her voice wasn't gloating. It was matter of fact. Detailed, time-stamped, and notarized evidence of what happened to the pension fund in 2018. the accounting error that cost 400 employees their retirement. We know it wasn't an error. It was a transfer to a shell company in the Seychelles to pay off your gambling debts in Macau. Ashton felt the blood drain from his face. That was supposed to be buried. He had paid a forensic accountant $2 million to scrub those servers. Tobias kept a copy. Henry explained, "The clause states that if you contest the will, if you file a single motion against Margaret, or if you attempt to disparage the family name in the press, this envelope goes to the SEC and the District Attorney's Office immediately. The wire fraud charge the FBI is here for today. That's a slap on the wrist compared to 20 years for massive embezzlement." Ashton looked at the agents. They seemed content to wait, almost amused by the family drama playing out. They knew they had him on the smaller charge, but the big envelope, that was the kill shot. "So that's it," Ashton hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I walk away with nothing, or I go to jail for the rest of my life." "You go to jail either way." "Ashton," Margaret said, standing up. She looked taller now, the mousy librarian persona shedding away to reveal a woman of steel. "But if you walk away now, quietly, maybe you'll only do 5 years for the wire fraud instead of 20 for the pension theft. It's your choice. The dollar is yours. Take it." Ashton looked at the crisp $1 bill Henry had placed on the table. It was an insult, a final slap in the face from a father who had despised him. Then, the sound of a zipper breaking the silence drew everyone's attention. Chloe was standing up. She had finished zipping her purse. She looked at Ashton with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Chloe," Ashton pleaded, reaching out. "Baby, listen, this is a setup. I have money in Zurich. I have. You have nothing," Chloe snapped. Her voice lost its airy, influencer lilt and dropped to a harsh, street-smart tone. "I understood the assignment. Ashton, I put up with your snoring, your bad breath, and your creepy friends because you promised me a villa in Como. But now you're broke, and you're going to prison." She turned to Margaret. "Hey, are you really the owner now?" Margaret looked at the young woman, surprised. "I am." "Cool," Chloe said, pulling her phone out. "Just so you know, I have recordings, lots of them. Ashton likes to talk when he's drunk. He talked about bribing a senator last month to get the zoning permits for the waterfront project. I have it all on the cloud." Ashton's eyes bulged. "You little witch, I bought you that car. I bought you those teeth." "And I'm keeping them," Chloe said, flashing a blindingly white smile. She looked at the FBI agents. "If I turn over the evidence, do I get immunity?" Agent Miller smiled. "We can certainly discuss it. Mom." "Chloe!" Ashton screamed, lunging for her. The agents moved instantly. Before Ashton could clear the corner of the table, he was slammed face first into the plush carpet. The sound of cuffs clicking shut echoed through the boardroom. "Ashton Langford, you have the right to remain silent," Agent Miller recited, hauling the former heir to his feet. Ashton's Italian suit was rumpled, his face pressed red against the floor. As they dragged him out, Ashton twisted his neck to look back at Margaret. "This isn't over, you hear me? Maggie, I know about the boy. I know what happened in '95. If I go down, I'm taking the secret with me." Margaret went rigid. Her face, previously composed, turned the color of ash. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Margaret, Henry, and the faint smell of Ashton's expensive cologne mixed with fear. Henry removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "He's bluffin'. Margaret. He doesn't know." "He knows something," Margaret whispered. She sank back into the chair, the weight of the victory crushing her. "He mentioned 95. He hasn't mentioned that year in decades." "He's desperate," Henry reassured her. "He's a cornered animal lashing out." Margaret looked at the yellowed marriage license still on the table. "Tobias promised me that Ashton would never find out. That was the deal. I take the company. I clean up the mess. But the past stays buried." "And it will," Henry said firmly. "Ashton is going to Rikers. He won't have the resources to dig up old graves." "You don't know him like I do," Margaret said, her eyes darkening. "Ashton is resourceful, and he has friends in low places. If he knows about the child, he'll use him. He'll use him to break the will." Henry leaned forward. "Then we need to be faster. We need to secure the company and liquidate his hidden assets before he makes bail. Do you want me to call the Swiss team?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Burn it down. Henry, find every cent he hid. Leave him with nothing but that $1 bill." The holding cell at the Federal Detention Center in Seattle smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a far cry from the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, which had been Ashton's home for the last 6 months. Ashton sat on the metal bench, staring at the concrete floor. His mind was racing. He had been processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of his dignity. But he wasn't stripped of his arrogance. Not yet. "Langford!" a guard barked. "Your lawyer is here." Ashton stood up, smoothing out his wrinkled shirt. He walked into the visitation room and sat behind the plexiglass. On the other side wasn't the prestigious corporate attorney from his father's firm. Henry Jacobs had fired that entire department an hour ago. No. Sitting there was Gavin Slade. Gavin was a man who looked like he slept in his suit. He was greasy, sharp-featured, and had a reputation for getting clients off on technicalities that would make a priest blush. He was expensive, unethical, and exactly what Ashton needed. "You look like hell, Artie," Gavin grinned, showing teeth stained with tobacco. "Get me out." "Gavin," Ashton said, his voice low. "Bail. Now." "Judge set it at $5 million. Flight risk." Gavin shrugged. "And your assets are frozen." Henry Jacobs moved fast. They filed an injunction based on the community property claim from your wife. Gavin chuckled at the word. "Didn't know you were a family man. Ashton." "Shut up," Ashton snapped. "I have money Jacobs can't touch. The Zurich account. The access codes are in a ledger. A physical ledger. I didn't trust the cloud." "Where is it?" Gavin asked, pulling out a notepad. "It's in the boathouse at the Hamptons estate, under the floorboards beneath the pool table. A red leather book. You need to get it. There's enough in there to pay your fee, post bail, and hire a hit squad if I wanted to." Gavin tapped his pen on the pad. "The Hamptons estate that's sealed. The feds are tossing the main house right now. They won't look in the boathouse. It's derelict. I kept it that way on purpose," Ashton insisted. "Get the ledger. Gavin, bring it here. Then we leverage Margaret." "Leverage her with what she has, the will, the marriage license, and the FBI," Gavin pointed out. Ashton leaned closer to the glass, his eyes manic. "Margaret has a secret. Before she left in 95, she was pregnant." Gavin paused. "You have a kid?" "I don't know," Ashton admitted. "She vanished. But a few years ago, I got a letter. No return address. Just a photo of a boy, maybe 20 years old. And a note, 'He has your eyes.' I thought it was a blackmail attempt, so I ignored it. But today, when she walked in, I saw the fear in her eyes when I mentioned 95. If there's an heir, Gavin mused, a biological child, that complicates the will. If Tobias didn't know about the grandson, we could argue the will is invalid because it excludes a rightful heir. Or better yet, we find the kid, and we manipulate him. If he's Margaret's son, she'll do anything to protect him, even give up the company. Exactly. Ashton smiled, a cruel, twisted expression. Find the ledger, get the money, then find the boy. His name, I think the letter said Leo or Liam, something starting with L. I'll get my PI on it, Gavin said, standing up. But Ashton, if I go to the Hamptons and that book isn't there, it's there, Ashton promised. It's my insurance policy. Gavin Slade didn't go to the Hamptons himself. He wasn't stupid. He hired a local contractor, a glorified burglar named Eddie, to retrieve the book. 2 nights later, Ashton was released. Not on bail, but on a technicality Gavin had found regarding the warrant's jurisdiction. It was a temporary reprieve, 48 hours of freedom before the hearing, but it was enough. Ashton stood on the sidewalk outside the detention center, breathing in the smoggy city air. A black sedan pulled up. Gavin was in the back seat. "Get in," Gavin said. Ashton slid in. "Do you have it?" Gavin handed him a red leather book. It was heavy, smelling of mildew and old paper. Ashton clutched it like a holy relic. This book contained the account numbers for over $50 million stashed in non-extradition countries. "Good," Ashton breathed. "Now, drive me to the airport. I have a private charter waiting at a secondary airfield." "Not so fast," Gavin said. Locking the doors. "We have a problem." "What?" "I had my PI run a search on Margaret Miller, specifically looking for birth records in 1995 in Ohio, where she was living. Gavin said, "We found a birth certificate, a boy, born February 1995, put up for adoption immediately." "So he exists," Ashton laughed. "Perfect. Who is he? Where is he?" "His name is Lucas," Gavin said, "and you're not going to believe where he is." Gavin tossed a dossier onto Ashton's lap. Ashton opened it. The first page was a photograph of a young man, roughly 29 years old. He was handsome, with dark hair and a sharp jawline. Ashton squinted. "I've seen him." "Yeah, you have," Gavin said. "He's the junior VP of operations at Langford Holdings, the kid you tried to fire 3 months ago because he asked too many questions about the shipping logs." Ashton's jaw dropped. "Lucas Wright, that brown-nosing kid from logistics. He is my son. And he's currently in the office," Gavin said. "With Margaret." Ashton felt a cold chill. "Does she know?" "I don't think so," Gavin said. "The adoption records were sealed. Tobias might have hired him not knowing the connection. Or maybe Tobias did know and was grooming him. But if Margaret finds out that the young executive she's currently auditing is the son she gave up, she's going to be emotionally compromised." Ashton stroked the leather cover of the ledger. A plan was forming. A plan far more diabolical than just fleeing the country. "Change of plans," Ashton said, his eyes gleaming. "Take me to the office." "Ashton, you're legally barred from the premises," Gavin warned. "I don't care," Ashton said. "I have the ledger. I can buy my way past security. I need to see Lucas. If I can get to the boy first, if I can tell him I'm his father and that his mother abandoned him to hoard a fortune, I can turn him against her. I can use him to stage a coup from the inside." "That's risky," Gavin said. "It's the only play I have," Ashton replied. "Margaret thinks she won. She thinks she has the money and the power, but she forgot the one thing that destroys families faster than greed." "What's that? Resentment?" Ashton said. "Drive." Meanwhile, in the executive suite of Langford Holdings, Margaret was exhausted. She had spent 48 hours with forensic accountants, unraveling the web of deceit Ashton had spun. Henry Jacobs walked in, looking grim. "Margaret, we have a problem." "What now? Did Ashton skip bail?" "No," Henry said. "He made bail. Gavin Slade found a loophole. But that's not the worst of it. Security cameras at the Hamptons picked up an intruder last night, in the boathouse." "The boathouse?" Margaret frowned. "There's nothing there." "Ashton kept a hidden ledger there," Henry said. "We missed it during the initial sweep. If Ashton has that ledger, he has access to his offshore funds. He has millions." "Margaret, he's dangerous again." Margaret stood up, walking to the window. The rain had stopped, but the city looked grey and hostile. "He won't run," she said. "Ashton is too proud. If he has money, he'll use it to fight." There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Margaret called. The door opened, and a young man walked in holding a stack of files. It was Lucas Wright, the VP of Operations. He looked tired but determined. "Ms. Langford. Mrs. Langford," Lucas corrected himself, looking at Margaret. "I finished the audit of the Western Fleet. You were right. Ashton was inflating fuel costs by 300%. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him. She had seen him in the hallways before, a bright, hard-working young man Tobias had been fond of, but she had never looked closely. Now, in the harsh light of the office, she saw it, the curve of his nose, the way his hair fell over his forehead. It was Ashton's nose. But it was her eyes. Margaret felt the room spin. She grabbed the desk for support. "Mrs. Langford!" Lucas dropped the files and rushed forward. "Are you okay?" He grabbed her arm to steady her. The touch sent a shockwave through Margaret. This was him. This was the baby she had handed to a nurse in a cold hospital room in Dayton, Ohio, 30 years ago, because she couldn't afford to feed him and feared Ashton would find them. I'm fine," Margaret stammered, pulling away. She couldn't breathe. "Lucas, how long have you worked here?" 5 years, Lucas said, confused. "Tobias hired me right out of business school. He took me under his wing." Margaret looked at Henry. Henry's face was pale. He saw it too. Tobias knew. Tobias had known all along. He had brought the boy back. He had reunited them without saying a word. "Lucas," Margaret whispered, "there's something." Suddenly, the intercom on the desk buzzed. A harsh, jarring sound. "Mrs. Langford," the security guard's voice crackled, sounding panicked. "We have a situation. Ashton Langford is in the lobby, and he's demanding to see Lucas Wright. He says it's a family emergency." Margaret's blood ran cold. Ashton knew, and he was coming to poison her son against her before she could even say hello. "Don't let him up," Margaret ordered. "He's already in the elevator," the guard replied. "He bypassed to the keycard system. He has the master codes." Margaret looked at Lucas. "Lucas, listen to me carefully. Whatever the man coming through that door says to you, you need to trust me." Lucas looked at her, bewildered. "Trust you? I barely know you. What is going on? Why does Ashton want to see me?" The elevator dinged in the hallway. Margaret stepped in front of Lucas. shielding him as the double doors to the office burst open. Ashton stood there, flanked by Gavin Slade and 2 private security goons. He looked manic, wild, and triumphant. He held the red ledger in one hand. "Hello, wifey," Ashton sneered. Then his gaze shifted to the young man behind her. His expression softened into a mask of fake paternal concern. "And hello, son." The silence in the room was so thick it felt like it could be carved with a knife. Lucas stood frozen, his eyes darting between the man he had only ever known as a tyrannical, distant boss, and the woman who had just inherited everything. "Son." Lucas's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you talking about?" Ashton stepped forward, his leather loafers clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. He didn't look like a man out on bail. He looked like a king returning to his throne. He ignored Margaret completely, fixing his gaze on Lucas with a look of practiced, heartbreaking sincerity. "I know it's a shock, Lucas. Believe me, I only found out the truth recently myself." Ashton lied, his voice dropping into a smooth, melodic baritone. "Margaret here. She kept you from me. For 30 years. She let me believe I had no legacy. She hid you away in the foster system, gave you up like a piece of unwanted luggage so she could disappear and live her own life without the burden of a child." "That is a lie," Margaret screamed, her voice cracking. "I gave you up to save you. Lucas Ashton was a monster then, and he's a monster now. I had no money, no family, and his father Tobias didn't even know I existed yet. I thought if I gave you to a good family, you'd have a chance at a life far away from the Langford curse." Ashton chuckled, a dark, vibrating sound. "A good family. Is that what you call the state-run institutions he bounced between Lucas? Look at the files. Look at the records. She didn't hand-pick a family for you. She dropped you at a fire station in Ohio and caught a bus. She didn't look back until she realized there was a $400 million inheritance on the line." Lucas turned to Margaret, his face a mask of burgeoning pain. "Is that true, did you leave me at a fire station?" Margaret felt her heart shatter. The shame she had carried for 3 decades, the memory of the freezing February night, the smell of the diesel exhaust, and the way Lucas had been wrapped in a thin, yellow blanket came rushing back. "Lucas. I was 20 years old. I was terrified. Ashton had threatened to take care of any problem that stood in the way of his trust fund. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting him from a father who would have loved him," Ashton cut in, stepping closer to Lucas. He reached out and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. To Margaret's horror, Lucas didn't pull away. He was too stunned, too vulnerable. "I'm a flawed man, Lucas. I've made mistakes, but I would never have abandoned my own blood. And now she's here to take the company I built, the company my father intended for us. She's using you as a pawn to legitimize her claim." "I am not using him," Margaret cried. "I didn't even know he was here until today." "Convenient timing, isn't it?" Gavin Slade spoke up from the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smirk. "The very day the will is read, the long-lost heir appears in the office of the woman who dumped him. It's a bit too Cinderella for a court of law. Don't you think?" Lucas looked at the red ledger in Ashton's hand. "What's that?" "This," Ashton said, holding it up like a trophy, "is the proof of my father's real intentions. This ledger contains the accounts Tobias set aside for his grandson. Not for a runaway wife who hasn't been seen in 30 years. My father knew you were here. Lucas. That's why he hired you. He was testing you, and he wanted me to give this to you when the time was right." This was a masterful lie. The ledger was actually Ashton's map of embezzled funds, but Lucas had no way of knowing that. To a young man who had grown up wondering why he was never wanted, the idea that his billionaire grandfather had a secret plan for him was an intoxicating poison. He knew, Lucas asked, his voice trembling. "He loved you," Ashton said, his eyes moistening with fake tears. "And I love you. Come with us. Lucas, we have the legal team to challenge this will. We'll prove she's an unfit heir. We'll take back what belongs to the Langford men. Don't let her manipulate you any longer." Margaret reached out, her fingers trembling. "Lucas, please. Look at him. Look at what he's doing. He's using your heart to save his wallet. If you walk out that door with him, he will destroy you the moment you're no longer useful." Lucas looked at Margaret. He saw the tears, the sensible shoes, the worn coat. Then he looked at Ashton, the power, the suit, the promise of a father. "You left me," Lucas said to Margaret, his voice cold and flat. "He's right about that part, isn't he? No matter the reason, you left." "Lucas, I need to think," Lucas said, shaking off Ashton's hand, but moving toward the door. "I need to get away from both of you." "Lucas." "Wait," Ashton called out, following him. "Take the ledger. Look at the numbers. See what your grandfather left for you." As they exited, Ashton looked back at Margaret over his shoulder. The mask of the grieving father vanished, replaced by a look of pure, predatory triumph. He mouthed 3 words. "I won. Maggie." 3 hours later, Margaret sat in the darkened boardroom. Henry Jacobs was on the phone, his voice a frantic staccato as he talked to the bank's security teams. "He's moving the money," Henry said, hanging up. "Ashton is using the ledger codes. He's transferring the offshore funds into a new trust, and he's listed Lucas as the primary beneficiary. It's a brilliant move, Margaret. By making Lucas the owner of the stolen money, he's tying the boy to the crime. If we go after the money, we have to prosecute Lucas." Margaret didn't look up. She was staring at a photo Tobias had kept on his desk, a photo of a young Lucas at his college graduation. Tobias had been there, standing in the background, out of focus. "Tobias knew," Margaret whispered. "He knew Lucas was my son, and he didn't tell me. He let me grieve for 30 years while he watched him grow up. He was protecting him, too," Henry said gently. He knew if Ashton found out Lucas was the rightful heir, Ashton would have eliminated the competition. Tobias waited until he was gone to bring you both together. He thought the will would be the bridge. Instead, "It's the bomb that blew us apart," Margaret said. She stood up, her face set in a grim line. "Where is the ledger from Ashton?" said the boathouse. "Yes, but the PI said it was retrieved." "Ashton's a creature of habit," Margaret said. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone, but he's predictable. He doesn't trust digital, and he doesn't trust people. If he's setting up a new base of operations, he won't go to a hotel. He'll go somewhere he feels in control. The Hamptons," Henry realized. "But the police are there." "Not at the old estate on the north side," Margaret said. "The one Tobias decommissioned 5 years ago. The one Ashton used for his private parties. Henry, I need you to call Agent Miller. Tell him the wire fraud isn't the lead anymore. Tell him it's human trafficking and money laundering. Do you have proof? No, Margaret said, grabbing her coat. But I know Ashton, and I know where he keeps the real bodies buried. The decommissioned Langford estate was a sprawling, Gothic nightmare on the edge of a crumbling cliff. The wind howled through the salt-cracked windows as Ashton paced the length of the library. Lucas sat in a leather chair, the red ledger open on his lap. He wasn't looking at the numbers anymore. He was looking at the names. Ashton, Lucas said, his voice echoing in the empty room. These accounts, they aren't in my name. They're in the name of a company called Vesper International. And these dates. These transfers happened last week, while my grandfather was in the hospital. Ashton stopped pacing. He poured himself a glass of neat scotch. Logistics, Lucas. Moving assets to protect them from the taxman. It's how the world works. No, Lucas said, standing up. This isn't logistics. This is theft. You were draining the company while your father was dying, and you told me this was my inheritance. Ashton's face darkened. The doting father act was wearing thin. Listen to me, you ungrateful brat. I gave you a name. I gave you a future. All you have to do is sign the affidavit Slade is bringing over. You testify that Margaret coerced Tobias into changing the will while he was on morphine, and you get $20 million. Cash. Tax-free. And what happens to Margaret? She goes back to the gutter where I found her, Ashton spat. Or she goes to jail for elder abuse. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, Lucas said. He took a step toward the door. I'm going to the police. Ashton moved faster than his age suggested. He grabbed Lucas by the throat, pinning him against the heavy oak door. The Scotch glass shattered on the floor. You aren't going anywhere, Ashton hissed. You think you're a Langford. You're a mistake I made in a motel in Ohio. You're a tool. I didn't spend 30 years building this empire to let a logistics clerk and a waitress take it away from me. Let him go. Ashton. The voice came from the shadows of the hallway. Margaret stood there, holding a heavy, old-fashioned flare gun she'd taken from the boathouse. Behind her, the silhouette of Agent Miller emerged. Ashton laughed, though his hand remained firmly on Lucas's neck. A flare gun? Maggie, really you always were a bit too dramatic. It's not for you, Ashton, Margaret said. She pointed the flare gun at the curtains, which were soaked in the old oil Ashton used to polish the wood. It's for the evidence. What evidence? The second ledger, Margaret said. She held up a small, black USB drive. The one Chloe gave me. The one where you recorded the names of the politicians you bribed. I didn't give it to the FBI yet. I wanted to see if you had a soul left. I wanted to see if you'd actually hurt your own son. Ashton's grip loosened. He looked at the USB, then at Lucas, then at the FBI agent who was now drawing his weapon. You're bluffing, Ashton whispered. Try me, Margaret said. Agent Miller, tell him what happens to the person holding the Blue Horizon accounts if this building goes up in flames with him inside. Arson, murder, and federal racketeering, Miller said calmly. Put the boy down. Ashton, it's over. Ashton looked at Lucas. In that moment, the boy saw the truth. There was no love in Ashton's eyes, only the cold, calculating hunger of a man who would burn the world to stay on top. Lucas twisted out of Ashton's grip and dove toward Margaret. Ashton lunged for the USB drive, but Miller was faster. He tackled Ashton into the remains of the shattered Scotch glass. 1 week later, the storm that had battered Seattle during the reading of the will had finally broken. In its place, A pale, crisp winter sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Langford Holdings boardroom. The mahogany table, once a battlefield of accusations and greed, now held only 2 items, a steaming pot of tea and a sealed manila envelope containing the results of a DNA test. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She was no longer the mousy woman in the beige trench coat who had walked in out of the rain. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her hair styled softly around a face that, while lined with years of hardship, finally looked at peace. Opposite her sat Lucas. He looked different, too. The weight of the corporate ladder was gone, replaced by the heavier, more complex burden of truth. He stared at the envelope, though he didn't need to open it. The results, a 99.9% match, were merely a formality now. The truth was written in the silence between them. "I didn't think I'd come today," Lucas admitted, his voice rough. He looked up, his dark eyes so like hers searching Margaret's face. "For 30 years, I told myself a story. I told myself my mother was a ghost, or a junkie, or someone who just didn't care enough to stay. It was easier to be angry than to be confused." Margaret nodded slowly, her heart aching for the boy she had been forced to leave behind. "Anger is a shield. Lucas, it kept you safe. I understand if you can't put it down yet." Lucas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photocopy of an old police report from Dayton, Ohio, dated June 1994. He slid it across the table. "I went digging," Lucas said, "after the police took Ashton away. I needed to know who he really was. I found this: domestic disturbance, hospital admission for broken ribs and a fractured cheekbone. You were 6 months pregnant with me." Margaret looked down at the paper, the memory of that night washing over her like cold water. "He told me if I ever tried to leave him, he'd make sure neither of us survived. When you were born, I knew I couldn't protect you and run at the same time. If I took you, he would hunt us down. If I left you where the state could hide you, you had a chance. You didn't abandon me," Lucas whispered, the realization finally settling in his chest. "You saved me." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. She reached across the vast table, her hand trembling slightly. This time, Lucas didn't pull away. He met her halfway, his grip firm and warm. It wasn't a magical fix. 30 years of separation doesn't vanish in an instant. But it was a start. "I don't want the money, Margaret," Lucas said, withdrawing his hand to wipe his eyes. "The millions, the estates, it's all tainted. It's Ashton's greed." "No," Margaret corrected him gently. "It was Tobias's life work. He wasn't perfect, but he spent his final years trying to atone for raising a monster. He left this company to me, not to keep, but to protect until you were ready. He knew you were the one who could fix it." "Fix it?" Lucas let out a dry laugh. "Ashton gutted the pension funds. The reputation of this firm is in tatters." "Exactly," Margaret said, her voice stealing with determination. "That is our inheritance. Lucas, not the yachts or the penthouses. Our inheritance is the responsibility to make it right. We rebuild the pension fund. We pay back the families Ashton stole from. We turn Langford Holdings into something honest." Lucas looked at her, really seeing her strength for the first time. I can't do it alone," Margaret smiled. "I'm just a waitress from Ohio who reads too many books. I need a vice president of operations who knows where the bodies are buried." Lucas took a deep breath, the winter sun illuminating his face. "Okay, we do it together. As for Ashton Langford, his world had shrunk from penthouses and private jets to a 6x8 cell in a maximum security federal facility. The King of Seattle was now inmate 8940. He spent his days in isolation, awaiting a trial that promised to be the spectacle of the decade. Taped to the grey concrete wall of his cell was a single object, the crisp $1 bill his father had left him. It was the only asset his high-priced lawyers couldn't argue away. Ashton would stare at it for hours, the face of George Washington mocking him in the dim light. He had traded his soul for an empire, only to be left with the price of a vending machine soda. Chloe, ever the survivor, had managed to escape the blast radius. She fled to Dubai before the indictments came down, having sold her exclusive story to a streaming giant for a 7-figure sum. She still sent Margaret a Christmas card every year, usually a photo of herself on a yacht with a new, equally wealthy fiancé. Margaret always put it directly in the shredder with a chuckle. In the end, the cheating millionaire had lost everything because he forgot one simple rule of the sea that his father, the old fisherman, had lived by. The tide always comes back, and it always brings the truth with it. Greed can build a skyscraper, but it can't build a foundation that lasts. Ashton Langford thought his wealth made him invincible, but he was undone by the very people he tried to discard. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the past is never truly buried, and justice has a way of finding its way home, even if it takes 30 years and a hidden marriage to do it. Margaret and Lucas proved that family isn't just about blood, it's about who stands by you when the storm hits. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of family secrets, boardroom betrayals, and sweet revenge, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a good twist. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into real-life drama and the ultimate stories of comeuppance. What would you have done if you were in Margaret's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.